Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 89. Just as a reminder, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/sustainablygeeky. And of course, you can listen and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts on YouTube and all of your social medias. Today, I am excited to be joined by Joel Enman, Farmland Protection and Stewardship Program Manager at Ontario Farmland Trust. Joel is going to be talking to us about conservation easement agreements. This is a topic I've been wanting to cover for a long time after covering this in my master's dissertation a few years ago. So, Joel, welcome to the show. And I guess, can you start by explaining what the Ontario Farmland Trust is and your role at the organization?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me. I'm really excited to chat about this today. So the Ontario Farmland Trust is a land trust, which is a charitable, not-for-profit organization. As a land trust, we are an environmental, non-governmental organization, also known as a ENGO. For Ontario Farmland Trust, we are the only land trust in Ontario dedicated to a mission of protecting and preserving Ontario's farmland, though lots of land trusts have protected farms in their portfolio. My role at the organization is to lead our land protection and stewardship program. So that involves me working with landowners to create conservation easement agreements. It involves monitoring our protected properties and also stewardship initiatives on our owned properties. So my organization also owns a farm, and I support and lead in riparian restoration on that property, creating new habitat for species at risk, and also managing invasive species that are present on the property. And then also part of my role is to support our education and community engagement program. So that involves doing presentations and meeting with different groups to kind of share what we do, the value of conservation easement agreements, and just doing presentations and stuff like that.
So quite a broad spectrum of activities, all, I guess, revolving around conservation easement agreements and promoting overall protection of land, like you said. Yeah. We're going to talk about conservation easement agreements, or CEAs, we might refer to them as. Joel is obviously from Canada, so a lot of what he says is going to be from a Canadian perspective. I'll kind of jump in occasionally with what I've learned about conservation easements in Texas, which was the focus of my research. And we may touch on things in other countries, but just keeping in mind that this is going to probably have more of a North American focus because, as we may talk about at the end, this practice probably isn't as common outside of these two countries, or maybe it is, and we haven't, had the opportunity to learn more about that yet. But anyhow, let's just start by defining what a conservation easement agreement is and how it differs from other forms of land protection.
Yeah, so a conservation easement agreement is an agreement made between a private landowner and a conservation organization. So these are voluntary agreements made, and the purpose of them is to protect the land in perpetuity. What makes this different from other protected areas that you might be familiar with, like a national park or a state park, is that the private landowner still gets to own the land, even though it is protected. So it's an agreement where the conservation rights of the land are donated to a conservation body. So often that's a land trust, and it's the land trust has the legal obligation to maintain those conservation rights in perpetuity. So the interesting thing about conservation easement agreements is that agreement is made with the original landowner, but it runs with the title of the land. So if the land changes hands, if it's sold, if it's passed through succession, the land protection remains, and those original restrictions and protections that are put on by the original landowner run with that title of the land. So they will apply forever, essentially.
Yeah, so they're relatively new, I'd say, in the U.S. anyways. Is that also the case in Canada? They're maybe within the last century or so kind of become more prevalent?
Yeah, definitely. So what gives us the legislation to be able to do conservation easement agreements, at least in a Canada context, is different from province to province. Mm-hmm. So in Ontario, at least, it's been since 1990, 1988, I believe, and the agricultural lands have been able to be part of the Conservation Lands Act since 2005. So very recent.
Yeah. So obviously this is, like I said, private land conservation. And I think, like you said, what a lot of people think of when they hear about protecting lands, it's usually just setting it aside to be public lands or to be like protected where nobody can touch it. Maybe it's owned by an NGO or a nonprofit, but it's kind of off limits. And in this case, you're saying the landowner maintains control of the land, but they have, I guess, a more limited scope of what they can actually do to the land as far as developing it, building, making big changes to the landscape itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So in the context of our kind of farmland conservation easement agreements, typically we will have different restrictions on different parts of the land. We might have a dedicated farmstead area, which has like less restrictions and allows the farmer to have more flexibility with that section of the land, typically around the building parcel. And then there might be a separate dedication for the forested and natural area that might have an intact forest or a wetland or a native grassland that they don't want to see converted into agricultural production. And then they might have a different part of the farm that's the agricultural area that's dedicated for pasture or croplands, something like that. And so there's restrictions on the different parts of the land, but the intention of at least the farmland conservation easement agreements is to allow for farmers to continue farming the land and prevent non-agricultural development on the land. So something like turning the land into an aggregate pit, for example.
Yeah. Or throwing another subdivision on it or something that's just gonna,
exactly.
Yeah.
Golf course.
Yeah. So in a way, it's a way to kind of organize the land and make sure that certain functions continue and certain places are protected. But someone listening to this might think, why would anyone give up that kind of control? Why would they let somebody come in and restrict what they can do on their own land? So can you tell me some of the reasons that landowners do agree to these easements, and why might they want this actually voluntarily?
Yeah, absolutely. We get asked this question a lot, and we actually we have quite a long list of landowners that are interested in this process, and it's for a myriad of reasons. So one of them might be kind of what I was just talking about, where they've seen neighboring farms or friends or family have experienced urban sprawl onto the land, where the land was maybe once zoned as agriculture, and then it gets zoned indifferently with more allowances, and the land gets bought up by developers and urban sprawl happens. So that's one reason, especially with farmland being high quality farmland is, we like to talk about it as a limited non-renewable resource. So high quality agricultural soils are not all over the place. And specifically in Ontario, we have some of the best soils in Canada. So it's not that we're anti-housing, for example, but smart urban planning is really important. If we pave over high quality farmland in any part of the world, it's not able to return back to its high quality if you just dig that pavement back up or finish or convert that aggregate pit back to a field. So that's really important that we're paying attention to that. And a lot of landowners understand the value of their land. They might have been on that land for multiple generations. It's also used commonly as a succession planning tool. So a lot of farmers come to us with the example that they are maybe the 7th generation farmer on the land. Their kids are maybe not interested in taking over the farm, or they don't have kids, and they know that after they pass, the land might go to a developer that could develop the land. So they're putting these restrictions in place not to tie the hands of a future farmer, but to allow there to be a farmer there in the future, because new and young farmers are not able to compete with developers for a cost of land. The cost of land everywhere has gone way up, but the cost of farmland specifically has gone up. And for new and young farmers trying to get into farming, competing with that is extremely difficult, if not impossible. So that is one big thing. Another example of why a farmer might be interested in putting these restrictions on the land is if they have a dedicated forested and natural area that they want in the future to remain a forested and natural area, but they also want farmland to occur. So they don't want a future farmer to come in and maybe drain the wetland that's super important to them or important to the ecological connectivity of the land. That's another one. There's also tax incentives that come with putting conservation easement on the land. We can get into those a little bit later, more into detail, because I know that probably changes a little bit from in the Canada versus US context. But any landowner who puts a conservation easement agreement on their land is eligible for a charitable tax receipt. And there's some other factors that can give them an enhanced tax incentive that might waive the capital gains tax that has been accumulating on their land. So that tax incentive can be a huge incentive for landowners getting interested in completing this process. But I would say the bulk of it is landowners thinking to the future, seeing lots of land in their area, farmland in their area that has been converted to non-agricultural use, and just planning for what the future is going to look like.
See, that's fascinating to me because I spoke with probably 15 or 20 land trusts in Texas when I was researching this, and almost every one of them said the primary motivator for landowners is legacy. And it sounds like it's the same in Canada. And it really goes to show like these landowners do care about their land, about the future of the land and its productivity, and not seeing it turned into development or, like you said, a pit or whatever. And in a place like where I'm from in Texas, you know, it's a big oil state. There's a lot of mining. That's a big concern of a lot of folks. I don't want the government or some company or somebody coming in and destroying this beautiful land that I've maintained for generations. So it's really neat to see like that's kind of consistent around the world. And yeah, you would kind of think sometimes maybe it's the money, the financial incentives, but that seems to kind of be a secondary or tertiary motivator for a lot of these folks. It's a nice to have, and obviously sometimes it is the primary motivator, but like it's not always the main reason people do it. So it's good to know. So on the flip side, what are some reasons landowners may be apprehensive? I'm sure you don't, get every single person you talk to sign up right away. Maybe it takes them years if they ever come around. So what are some of the reasons like people may not want to do this?
Yeah, I think the reason why some people are apprehensive are actually is the same reason why people are interested in this process. We've had some landowners who might not be interested in this process because they want the option to potentially sell to developers in the future. If they're sometimes farms, they have already been developed upon kind of in every direction. So they're losing kind of the agricultural network that exists, and they're worried about being on an island on their own and maybe wanting to sell to a developer and then setting up shop elsewhere in an area that has a better agricultural like framework that's still in existence. And if you put a conservation easement agreement on your property and restrict agricultural or you restrict housing development to a point where there can't be a subdivision, that then a developer is not going to be interested in buying that land. So some landowners are worried about that. The potential of them needing to sell for the highest value not being applicable to them in the future. Another reason might be around those, if they feel like the restrictions are too heavy, that they feel like it would be too limiting for them in the future or too limiting for their next generation of kin. So we've kind of taken that into consideration, and every conservation easement agreement we write is unique, but we're kind of moving towards a second style of land protection that's a single agricultural zone and doesn't have the delineated zones of protection, that allows for a little bit more flexibility for some of those landowners who might want to change up where their forest is currently on the property or change some of those details. So yeah, I would say the potential of not being able to sell to developers and the like maybe concerns of the restrictions being too difficult for them to adapt with the future is maybe the two reasons why people might not be interested in this process.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you're essentially giving up control over what you can do on your land, and that is a big deal. So let's talk about the process for placing a CEA on a property. What is I guess, can you walk me through from the beginning, what you guys go through, and then I guess kind of the timeline, like how long does the whole process take? I know it's different for everyone, but an estimate kind of.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll run you through it kind of like you're an interested landowner. Maybe that will work the best. So when an interested landowner wants to get a little bit more information on the process, get a little bit more information on any of this, they submit an inquiry. So this can come in many forms. Sometimes landowners would prefer to do this over the phone. So we also have an inquiry form that's available on our website for interested landowners to put some details in. They can also email one of the staff. So that starts the process. From there, we'll have a call with the landowner, discuss some of the basics of what a CEA is, some of the basic milestones, and if they are interested in pursuing further, we'll then have a visit to the property. So we'll meet with the landowner. We usually take our template, which is our kind of step one of an easement, and walk through some of the standard covenants and restrictions that are in there for the landowner to get a feel for what an easement will look like, knowing that all of them can kind of be customized to that specific landowner. And from there, if the landowner is still interested, they will submit a letter of intent. So because we're a charitable not-for-profit, we have staff at the organization, and we also have a volunteer board of directors and committees of that board. So there is a dedicated committee for our land protection program. So the staff will bring a property report to the committee and say, we're interested in proceeding with this project. What do you think? Do you think this works within, our budget and next year's kind of work plan? And if they approve that, then it goes to our board of directors for approval. And then from once the board of directors approves it, then we let the landowner know we're approved, we're ready to start working on this project. From there, from the time of it getting approved to the time that the easement is registered, usually takes about 1.5 to 2 years, which is maybe a longer process than people expect off the jump. But we always say that we want to get it right the first time, because these agreements are supposed to be in perpetuity and they're long legal documents. So we want to make sure that we're checking off every box, that the landowners, also certain milestones that can only occur at certain times of the year. So from there, we start drafting the easement. So we'll meet with the landowner, we'll discuss multi-zone, single zone easement. What are the aspects of their property that they really want to restrict? What are the aspects of their property that they want to leave open for future changes? So these are the kinds of conversations we start talking about. We might meet with because to have an easement signed, all of the landowners who are on title of the land need to sign off on it, but they also often will bring in their kids or the next generation to also take part in the conversations around drafting the easement to make sure that it works for that next generation too. So the drafting of the easement is kind of an iterative process, but from there we're kind of deciding how things go. And if we're moving forward with the kind of delineated zones, one thing we'll have to book is a survey with a registered surveyor, and that will delineate the zones on the land. So once the landowner is happy with, this area makes sense, I want to keep this wetland as a wetland, we need to have a survey, not just do a boundary survey of the whole property, but a survey of each of those kinds of parts of the property. So that is something, we don't have an in-house surveyor, so we hire a third-party surveyor. So that's one aspect. Another thing we'll do is, if we think that the property will qualify for the federal enhanced tax incentive, we'll complete an ecological assessment on the property. So that is a full day visit to the property, and we do a species inventory. So that's usually myself. I have a background in zoology as well as environment sustainability. So I'm a trained biologist. So that is the area where I will do a species inventory with another staff member at OFT. And then we also will pull aerial imagery and government data around the species at risk present on the property, if there's unique geography to the property, proximity to other protected areas, and create this large application to the Ecological Gifts Program, which is a federal program. About, I would say, 70% of our protected properties qualify for that program. So that is something that that when we're looking for species at risk, we want to do it at a really specific time of year. There's no perfect time of year to see every single species at risk, but typically the area where we will see, at least in Ontario, the most amount of species at risk is between kind of mid-June to mid-July. So that's when we would complete that ecological assessment. We also have to complete a baseline documentation report. So this will be done for any sort of conservation easement agreement in Canada and the US. And this is a full kind of photo library of what the land looks like at the time of protection. It's best practice to do this about 6 months before the easement is registered. So this is typically something we do in the fall. And we're just taking note of exactly what the property looks like as a snapshot in time, so that when we come year over year to monitor the property, we have something to compare to, essentially. And then the next stage would be completing an appraisal. So the property needs to be appraised for its fair market value, and then the fair market value with restrictions on the property. So that difference in value is what the charitable tax receipt's written for, and that will depend on the area that it's in, and also what level of restrictions are on the property. So typically, we'll see like an 11 to 15% decrease in value, fair market value. But there's been times where it's been more than that. There's been times where it's been less than that, just depending on the level of restrictions and what the area is already kind of zoned as. So that appraisal is also done by a third party. And then once that is all done and the easement is registered, then going forward, we will monitor the property once per year.
Yeah, so the landowner gets a tax incentive based on the difference in value of the property, because you're essentially taking away their development rights, so that's reducing the value. And then they could also possibly get a rebate or credit for ecological services that land might be providing. Is that correct? There's like a couple of ways to get that tax financial incentive.
Yeah, I think it operates a little bit differently between Canada and the US, because in Canada, the development rights are not inherent to the landowner. Okay. It in our case, the way CRA, like the Canada Revenue Agency, sees it, it's the conservation value. So your conservation rights of the property are being donated, essentially. Okay,
gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes more sense to me, because I believe when I was looking into this, it was more, we're giving you a tax break on your income tax or your inheritance tax or whatever. There's several different types of tax that you can get a rebate on based on the reduced value of the development potential, but also there are federal incentives, like different programs. There used to be, I don't know if there still are in the US, where they would maybe through the National Wildlife Service or I can't remember all of them. There's one for the military. There's several where you can apply for funding if it meets a specific criteria to protect, type of fish or a buffer zone for the military or this or that. So depending on where you live, there also might be local incentives in your state or even city. I know like the city of San Antonio has a great, very robust program to protect their watershed. So they get funding from tax. A portion of their sales tax actually goes to that, or used to. So you can really see some creative ways to incentivize landowners to protect things depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So in your case, it's agricultural land, but a lot of places might have a focus on a different type of species, or even I've heard there's land trusts that do conservation easements for like rock climbing and preserving cool places to go rock climbing, or nice views or something. So it's really cool the different options that are out there, and how many, like, the potential, I guess. Like if you don't have agricultural land and you're in Ontario and you still want to do this, I'm sure there's other land trusts that you could point them to say like, here's your options.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there's land trusts at least all over Ontario, and they're all over Canada. And if you have natural land that you might not have a farm, but we might not be the land trust that you're going with based on where you are. But that the Ecological Gifts program is a federal tax incentive that is offered through Environment and Climate Change Canada. So whatever land trust you're working with would be able to put that application together for you. And that's a big one because the tax benefits of the Ecological Gifts program can be used for up to 10 years and it waives capital gains at the time of protection. So that can be a huge tax incentive. And that works on farmland that works on some farmland, not all farmland, about 70%, but on some of your more typical forested and natural areas that would be put in a conservation easement agreement could qualify for that Eco Gifts program, at least in Canada.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm assuming you guys all kind of work together and pass on different, I don't know, options for easements. If it doesn't work for your organization, maybe you'd share it with another one, because the ultimate goal of everyone is just conserving the land and doing the best by the land itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a member of the OLTA, which is the Ontario Land Trust Alliance. But then we also, which has a gathering every year, but then we're also a member of the Canada Land Trust Alliance as well. And there's lots of times where a landowner might approach us because they've been referred to us by another local land trust that it says like, we can't achieve your goals, or come see these people, or we might work there's been other properties where we have worked together with other land trusts in the area because it's important to the landowner to have both of us involved, or us involved in the agricultural side, somebody else involved in the natural side. So yes, we're tight. It's a small community, but it's a tight knit crew for sure.
Yeah, that's great because one group can't do it all, and it's nice to have other people that can support you if you need it. A question I thought of as you were going through the process, obviously this is a time consuming process. You're using staff time, you're filing paperwork, that probably has a bit of a fee to it. You're hiring surveyors, you're doing all this stuff. So there is a cost associated with this process. Does that get passed on to the landowner who is already kind of giving up, rights to their land, or is there a funding mechanism for all of that? I guess does it vary land trust to land trust, or?
Yeah, I would say so in our case, if a landowner is not able to donate to the project, that doesn't restrict them from being able to take part in the process. We get our funding from a variety of sources. So there's some federal grants that we receive to be able to do this. There's some provincial grants that we receive to do this. There's some private foundations that we receive grants from. And then we also, as an organization, receive donations, which are always helpful from just whoever. Anybody can donate to us and help who believes in our mission. So that all of those costs are covered by all those different grants and also donations. That covers our staff time. That covers, again, the surveyor costs, the appraisal costs, mileage, that kind of stuff. But some landowners are able to also donate to a certain amount of money to the project, and any money that they donate is also eligible for a charitable tax receipt on top of the charitable tax receipt that they might receive for the donation of the conservation rights as well. So that fluctuates between land trust to land trust as to how much they're getting from which different source. But it's not required to be able to complete the process.
Yeah, as you were talking through it, I was just thinking it seems like it would make your job a lot harder if you were saying, oh, and by the way, I also have to charge you for all of this, and you're already doing, a lot by donating the land. So that's good to know that there are options out there. And I think that is similar in the United States as well. Like there's usually federal, state, and or philanthropic funders that help pay for those additional costs that aren't just reimbursing the landowner themselves for the price of what they're donating, but actually paying for the work being done. So you mentioned that you all monitor the land after you've placed the easement. What does that look like? I can imagine it could be maybe a little contentious depending on if the land has switched owners, or if you're, they've gotten frustrated with some of the restrictions, or is it usually pretty seamless? Like what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I'm part of my role is to do all the monitoring. So I go to all the properties every year. As the organization grows, we're starting to be able to hire some more regional staff, which is great, because every year with more protected properties is more properties to monitor. Our rule is that we always have 2 members of the organization present on the property at the time of monitoring for safety reasons. But the landowner is informed of the date like at least a month in advance. The landowner doesn't need to be present at the time of the monitoring. Sometimes they want to do the whole walk with us, sometimes they don't. Kind of either works for us, but we want to make sure our arrival is not impeding their agricultural activities that they're planning to do on the land. And when we show up, we walk around the property to all the major areas. We take photos, and then we also take GPS points of some of the different areas. While we're there, we'll also take note of any invasive species on the property, any species at risk that we might see on the property, and any changes on the land. Even if it's not a violation, we'll just take note of a change on the land. So, for example, last year there was a big ice storm in the spring. So a lot of the properties I went to in one area all had a lot of tree damage. So that's not something we consider a violation, but it's something that I wanted to take note of because it's a change in the landscape. And a lot of landowners are pleased with hearing more about their land, maybe more species that are present on their land that they didn't know each year. So I would say, in general, we have good relationships with the landowners that we work with, and yeah. So that's the visit in a nutshell. Depending on how large the property is, it might take me anywhere from like a half an hour to maybe 3 hours to visit the property. And then we just create an internal report that's kept on file for that year's monitoring. And it typically takes place between May and September. And yeah, we like to give the landowner lots of notice. But that is we try and make it a point when we're completing the easement process of like the purpose and value of the monitoring process, because as this is a legal agreement between us and the landowner, we have the legal right and responsibility to make sure that those conservation interests are being maintained. And so we are what we call our first generation landowners always understand that. For any person who is looking to buy land that has an easement on it, has one of our easements on it, we're able to participate in that sale process. So if the landowner is interested, so we're available for consulting for a new landowner who might want to come in and buy this land, but they don't know what an easement is. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. We have a printout that's dedicated to this is what it looks like if you buy land with an easement on it. And then we're also available for meetings and phone calls. So we try and be proactive in that approach so that if somebody doesn't end up with a property that they don't really understand the full context of what they're agreeing to when they buy that. So we find that really helps the process as well.
Well, and then you don't show up on their land and they're like, who are you? Why are you on my land? When you're trying to inspect it or something.
Yeah.
Do you find that people who are looking to buy a property with an easement, like it's a deterrent, or maybe it makes it more attractive, or does it not really come up? Like, does it make much of a difference, I guess, to the next buyer of that property?
Yeah, so we have been an organization since 2004. So a lot, I would say about half of our properties are still our first generation owners, but some of our properties that were protected in the original group of protections might be on their second or third generation of farmers. And I think it depends on what that person's looking for. So sometimes a property with an easement might be going for less money than a property that they might be competing with a developer to buy. So for somebody who's trying to get into farming, that cost that's maybe more closely to the fair market value might be an incentive. We know that landowners who are maybe more ecologically minded farmers might be more interested in a property with an easement on it, because they know that the natural areas are being maintained and somebody's looking after the property. And then it also might not be somebody who wants to totally change the landscape, might not be interested in it at all. But would say that for any of the properties that are protected with an easement, we haven't seen them struggle to be sold. Let's say that in comparison to a property that doesn't have an easement on it.
Yeah, I actually personally was thinking when I learned about easements, like, it might be cool to have a place with an easement because one, it would cost less, but also, it's protected. Like for me, I'm conservation minded. That's my whole thing. Like, I don't want to turn my land into, assuming I'll ever have land, let's be real, but but yeah, like, I wouldn't want to develop a high rise, or even maybe the most I would do is a shed, but that would, to me, be fine. But I can see how someone else who has dreams of, like, putting a pool in, or I don't know, changing the whole landscape of their home. But yeah, on that note, like, do you ever run into violations of easements, and what do you do in that case? Like, is it a matter of it goes to court, or you try to mediate it between the landowner and you, or how does that process look?
Yeah, totally. So when it comes to violations, we're lucky to have had pretty minor violations over the years, and can't really get into exact examples. But the first step in that process is a conversation. We can bring a violation to court if need be, but that's an expensive and time consuming process that won't help with your landowner relations. So typically the violations we have had might been minor. They might be, this is the true area where the forested natural area began, and it got farmed a little bit into let's say it got farmed in a little bit into the forest. Okay, so we'll say, you know what, you got to just plant some of those trees back in. That's not something that requires a court. It requires a conversation or something. Yeah, so some minor easement violations like that. We do have the ability to amend an easement if we needed to, like, do something. That is something that's not an easy thing to do, and typically the way it looks is we would want to amend it to increase the protection, not reduce the protection of the land. But yeah, I would say that we can take a violation to court if need be. We haven't so far, knock on wood, that we don't have to, but it always starts with a conversation, and typically some of those violations can be remediated within one season. So it's not really necessary to escalate that any further.
Yeah, I would think in your business you're trying to build and foster relationships, not, going to court kind of does the opposite of that. But that's obviously like a last ditch effort. But yeah, if you have people who are amenable to this and they went into it voluntarily, then probably they're going to be okay with making changes if they accidentally, overstepped the bounds or whatever. And talking about these agreements, as you mentioned earlier, they are in perpetuity. And you mentioned there could be some changes, but are there examples of them ever being reversed if they're challenged? Maybe not with your land trust but that of. Are they ironclad like they say they are, or are there loopholes that people try to get around, or that they can be taken away?
Yeah. So the one thing that can truly undermine an easement in a Canadian context is expropriation, which believe is similar to eminent domain in the US, whereby the government can take the land, either the federal government or in our case, provincial government, but it's supposed to be for public use. So building of a hospital, highway, something like that. We have not seen in an Ontario context that happen with a conservation easement agreement, at least that I'm aware of. But it legally can still happen, which that sometimes that can be a reason why landowners are apprehensive to get involved in a CEA process, because they kind of say, what's the point if expropriation can still take my land? But I will say that if you're a provincial or federal or state or federal government, you're probably less likely to expropriate land that has an easement on it versus expropriate land that doesn't have an easement on it, because you have to always make a case for expropriation. But if the land is protected with an easement, then you have the whole backing of the whole land trust community. Because if there starts to be a precedent set that this easement can be expropriated, well, why can't this easement be expropriated? Why can't this easement? So there would be not just our legal team and our representation wanting to not allow that to happen. It would be everybody who uses this mechanism. And I will say, I'm aware of other eco gifts properties, especially if a property is certified as an eco gift, then also the federal government has an interest in that land too. So if it's at least the Environment and Climate Change Canada ministry. So if there's like the Ministry of Transportation, let's say at the provincial level wants to expropriate the land, but it's an eco gift, then the federal ecological, like that's another government party that has interest in that land that would want to see to that it doesn't get expropriated for something like a road. So yes, expropriation can still always, we always say that is still a mechanism that can undermine an easement, but we do always say that a CEA is the highest level of protection that a private citizen can put on their own land.
Okay.
So
it's so refreshing to hear of a government that actually finds environmental protection and climate change as a good thing, and like a reason to keep land, not just throw it into the public good. But anyways, my next question was actually going to be about eminent domain or expropriation, because I have heard that it can be a deterrent to, I guess, government takeover of land in a way, because at least if got a federal or state backing, and this is in the States, obviously, a local government doesn't want to go up against that, or it's too much red tape, or the justification would just not add up or take so much work. On the flip side, though, I also heard that sometimes if you have big tracts of land, it can make it more attractive for eminent domain, because it's not piecing together multiple landowners' tiny swaths of land, and that can be time consuming and onerous. So in this case, they just have to go after one landowner and work it out with them. So I guess it can be a double-edged sword depending on the project, the person going after the land, etc. But overall, it sounds like it's probably more of a deterrent, which is a good thing, and it's not guaranteed, but yeah. But that's pretty much the only thing that can undo a conservation easement agreement is eminent domain or expropriation, it sounds like.
Yeah, and that's also been something that has been of interest to landowners when the policy changes, because as we know, no matter what country you're in, policy can change at the stroke of a pen, right? Mm-hmm. So there's even landowners who maybe have an area that would be considered protected by something like a policy that sits upon that. But I've heard it called in the land trust community the like belt and suspenders approach, where like you're putting two levels of protection on it by having also a CEA on it. So it's just another level of something that can be a deterrent, for example, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think conservation easements aren't as well known throughout the world in general. When you think of land protection, especially the private land protection, I'd never really heard of it before I started looking into it for schools. So it's cool that that's available and that more and more people are learning about it, and we're talking about it here, obviously. So hopefully we get the word out. But I think there's a lot of promise in conservation easements, and if I had land, I would throw one on there, immediately. But in this economy, we'll see when that happens. Speaking of them becoming more and more common, do you know, outside of the US and Canada, is this gaining traction? Do you have any idea of kind of worldwide where conservation easements sit?
Yeah, so I know in the Canada and US context, we call them conservation easement agreements or CEAs, but I know outside of North America, there are similar mechanisms. I know in Australia and the UK, they call them conservation covenants. And it's still a voluntary private agreement between a conservation body and a private landowner. So I think that mechanism exists outside. It's just maybe has a different name and under different legal contexts. But I know for sure the UK and Australia, and I also think maybe South Africa also has some sort of conservation covenant, conservation reserve covenant. But in that context of private land agreement between a private landowner and a conservation body, that might be a non-governmental organization.
Yeah, so really all places that were former colonies the UK. I wonder if there's correlation there, but yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have time to like research in the European context or South America or anywhere else. But I'm personally living in Ireland, and I know that there's a very strong private land ownership outlook here, based on hundreds of years of colonization and oppression from England. So I feel like anytime you talk to landowners or farmers about restricting what they can do with their land, they get very defensive, and the general consensus is, let us do what we want. Now, there's a lot of that in the U.S. as well, obviously, but it's just a lot more personal here, I think, because the history is fresher and everything. So it's interesting though to see if it'll change in the future, and it's good to know that something is out there that's similar in other parts of the world. So
yeah, I think for when I'm kind of talking to landowners who might not be familiar with this, and I was not familiar with this until just a few years ago. To be honest,
mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I don't think, as a student learning about conservation, I had heard the term land trust, but I don't really know what that meant, what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So, and some land trusts don't do easements at all. Some of them just do fee simple donation of land. But I think when I'm talking to landowners, I always try and frame it as like this is something that you're doing for the future. It's not something that you're doing for now.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about, somebody will reach out and say like, this beautiful swath of farmland is going to be developed. What can you do about it? And the developer already owns it. Unfortunately, for our case, it's nothing.
Yeah,
because that it's like we
damage is done.
yeah, we would have wanted to put an easement on that years ago. And with a lot of the looks can be deceiving, where you'll still see a lot of farmland, but that farmland's being land banked by a developer for future development. And they might have a tenant farmer on there, but as soon as that they can get the land use policy changed on that, they will develop upon it. So sometimes it's like, oh, we should have done that 10 years ago. We should have done that 20 years ago. So it's kind of it's a insurance policy for the future for future farmers, not necessarily for you at that moment.
So what if you were to like get right in the middle of one of those land banks and get a little swath of land protected with an easement? Would that be effective in kind of ruining the whole thing, or would they just build up around you and kind of make it pointless? I don't know. Just thinking out loud. I don't.
Yeah, tough to say. I think it depends on the kind of farming that's occurring. There's also farms that we look at that are literally right on the edge of a subdivision, but they might be doing something that's more market garden focused. And now they're running a CSA, like a community, and their customers are right at their doorstep. That might not work for a dairy cattle operation that has minimum distance separation requirements because they're doing manure storage. So I think when we say developed around, that's definitely restrictive to the type of agriculture. But I think even still having a protected area, at least personally, in that area there's still value to that, and it wouldn't be pointless. And all of our easements allow for, if agriculture becomes unusable or you're unable to do agriculture in the future, that can always be turned into an ecological area. So for a lot of our easements, they're written as 999 years of length. So in 700 years from now, if climate change changes things rapidly and that soil is no longer arable, it can still become a green space. And we're not forcing people to do agriculture on that in 700 years from now, let's say. So there is that kind of other aspect where it would still be a protected area in the future, even if agriculture is not, feasible at the scale it's being done at currently.
Okay. Well, we've kind of touched on this a bit, but I guess if you have anything to add, why do you think it's important to have these private conservation efforts like easements or just private land, whatever, in addition to public lands? Is there anything else you'd add to that? I know we've talked about it a bit, but.
Yeah, I think I think it can be additive to have both. And specifically from the like farmland protection context, the ecological corridor creation that can happen on farms that are near more traditional natural areas is something that is not always taken into consideration. I think farmers get a lot of a bad rap for being a direct threat to ecology and a direct threat to the environment, but we need food to eat. But also, the land that they have, most farms have some sort of natural space to it, and if that connects to a larger provincially protected area, federally protected area, even municipally, like locally protected parkland, that's creating an ecological corridor for animals to travel through, but also still allows people to own that land in the future, and doesn't just, because if we make it all public lands, then nobody's owning the land and stewarding the land and working the land all the time. So I think like a mosaic of both is ideal for me.
Yeah. And I think too, it's unrealistic to expect that the government or whoever, NGOs, will be able to feasibly obtain all this land to make it public. Like, people aren't going to sell their land or donate it at the amounts that we need to reach our climate goals or biodiversity goals. I mean, if the goal is 30 by 30, which I don't think that's realistic at all, but if that's the goal, of setting 30% of land aside for nature, like, we're not going to do it with public lands alone. Just the process of getting there, like the bureaucracy, but like, we need to be including private landowners. And you have a lot of states that are highly private. There's hardly any public land because there's none left, or it's just all gone. Like, especially on the East Coast, all that stuff was kind of gobbled up early. Now you go out west and it's the majority public land, but like, it's just, you have to kind of work with what you've got. You can't do that in Massachusetts. Like, there's nothing left to take. And I'm sure it's similar in Canada. Like, you have to kind of think about what's practical.
Yeah, similar. Also, distribution as well. Like, a lot of the eastern areas are, when we're talking about Maine or Prince Edward Island, like, a lot of those are privately owned versus something in Alberta. But yeah, I agree. We need to do a better job at counting other things that still provide ecological value. I've read people, other people who are maybe in the environmental space, like, you're protecting farmland. Why would you protect farmland? And, I always say, like, if I could only take you on a trip with me for the day, and we're looking in the forest and seeing species at risk, and then we're standing in the cattle pasture and I'm seeing like one of the most endangered birds I've ever seen in my life. But it's not in the forest, it's in the pasture, and like, those different landscapes are still valuable. And how can we count those? How can we count the value of grasslands, even if they're not native grasslands, they're tamed grasslands, but they're still an area where species at risk birds live. And, if you were to convert that all into something else, you would lose that important grassland habitat that is still very important for carbon sequestration, and very important habitat that is additive to the forest, not subtractive.
Yeah. And you're kind of adapting to what's there. Like, let's make the best of this. It's already here. Let's protect what's left. No, great point. I guess my last question before we move on is, if listeners want to learn more about getting a CEA on their own property, or just what a CEA is in general, where should they start?
I would say, depending on where you are, is to look up what your local land trust is. In the Canadian context and the Ontario context, the Ontario Land Trust Alliance has a map that is publicly viewable map that has colored shapes on it, where you can click where you are and what land trusts or land trusts work in your area. But I know that there's similar applications available in the US. If you're specifically looking in Ontario to protect your farmland, you can reach out to us directly. You can go on to our website, ontariofarmlandtrust.ca. There's an inquiry form on there. You can reach out to one of the staff. But yeah, reaching out to your local land trust is the best start. And there's lots in Canada and the US.
Yeah, there's a National Land Trust Alliance, and then each state's going to have their own, and probably regional ones as well. So just kind of Google or search what you're looking for. Well, on that note, are there any other resources you'd share with folks who want to learn more about anything we've talked about today? Books, podcasts, documentaries, things that you found profound?
Yeah, so definitely you can subscribe to Ontario Farmland Trust's newsletter. Even if you're not in Canada or you're not in Ontario, we operate a winter webinar series that we have speakers from all over the place come. Last year, we actually spoke with the Farmland Trust that's in Maine. So we kind of had a Canadian versus American context. So there's also best management soil practices. And that's a free winter webinar series that we offer every year. So you can subscribe to our newsletter where you'll get monthly updates on what we're doing and what's kind of going on in the farmland protection space. A book that I read is called Farmland Preservation, Land for Future Generations. And it's all about why it's important to protect farmland. It's something that is given to all of the new staff at Ontario Farmland Trust. Definitely has a Canadian focus, but it also talks about Australia, and it also talks about the States. So I have a paperback copy, but I know that it's offered through it. If anybody has a Kindle, you can get it on Kindle. It's a really interesting book. And then personally, a book that I have really found valuable is A Garden for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, which if you're in Ontario or the Great Lakes area in the States, it's all how to plant a native garden for different scales of space, whether you're living in a condo balcony or you have a large rural area. I think for farmland protection and also for conservation as a whole, all of our pollinators could use some extra help right now. So if you're anywhere in the Great Lakes area in Canada, the US, it's a really great resource for planting more native plants.
Yeah, that's great. We will link all these in the show notes for anyone who's interested in learning more. I guess now, if there's nothing else you want to add to our conversation, we'll go ahead and move on to our Green Life Hack.
Yeah, that sounds.
Yeah, so that's just where we share one thing that people can do in their daily lives to live more sustainably. So Joel, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, something that I'm trying to implement more in my own life, and I think is applicable. Trying to think of something that's applicable to farmland and applicable to kind of if you're in Ireland or you're in Canada and the US, is looking up more of the concept of eating seasonally. There's resources out there for whatever part of the country or whatever country you're in of what products are being grown or are available that are fresh. Because no matter where you are in the world, the products that are picked at closer to its peak ripeness is going to taste better. It's going to be more nutritional. And so that is something, of course, there's things that, I currently can't get an avocado that's grown close to me, but just trying to implement more seasonal foods into your diet can be helpful for the local economy. It can be helpful for reducing the cost of transportation of food, which always has an environmental impact and also can support your local farmers.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think we've just grown so accustomed to being able to eat whatever we want, whenever we want, any time of the year. And we forget, like, just a few generations ago, people couldn't eat oranges in winter, or, they were considered a luxury, like expensive. And so, yeah, being more conscious of that and kind of the footprint that goes along with that is very important. Mine is a little bit lazy based on our conversation today, but it's basically just if you have land, talk to your local land trust, maybe get some information about adding an easement or see what options are there. If you're not interested in easement, maybe you have extra land you want to donate or have, public talks on or something. If you don't have land, which I'd say majority of us don't, see if there's a way you can support a local land trust or a local park, whether that's volunteering, getting a national or an annual pass, or doing something to help the local lands that are protected in one way or another in your area, because they need help. No matter where you live, there's going to be something that needs help. So see what you can do there. Well, Joel, thank you so much for sharing information about what you do and Ontario Farmland Trust and just conservation easements in general. Where can we find you and the Land Trust online?
Yeah, you can find us on OntarioFarmlandTrust.ca is our website. I'm on LinkedIn at just my name, Joel Enman. And then you can, if you follow our newsletter, you can see that we do presentations kind of all over Ontario. So you might be able to take part in one of the presentations. Thanks for bringing up volunteering. We also have a volunteer program. So if you're interested in joining in kind of any aspect, we have field volunteers. We also have volunteers that support with grant writing and policy. and also with education stories and blog posts. So lots of opportunities to volunteer. But yeah.
Perfect. Well, you can find me personally on Instagram and Blue Sky at Het's Gonna Be Me, and the show itself on Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, and YouTube. It's Sustainably Geeky, and then wherever you listen to podcasts, of course, and buy me a coffee if you're so inclined. Joel, thanks again for being on, and to everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.